So,
That's lovely. You're
okay.
indulging an old lady.
Absolutely. So, I mean, is there any... there's a few themes that have come up so far that people are interested in, and I'm thinking, what's most important to you? And we can maybe start there. So I've kind of loosely based them on family and day-to-day life.
Yes.
There's a lot of questions about grandpop.
Yes.
There's some questions about your early childhood.
Yes.
There's questions about historical events that you have witnessed or lived through.
Yes.
There's some questions about technology emerging through your life, the medical industry, and then there's a number of questions about your Christianity and some philosophical sorts of questions and sentimental stuff.
Yes.
Is there anywhere in particular anywhere that you would like to start, or would you like me to just go through any old order?
I'm not. You can have it in the order you like, because usually, what was the old song about? It's about beginnings. It's a very good place to start. Did that come out of Julie Andrews and when she was a nun?
Yep, it rings a bell.
Wasn't it something about let's start at the beginning because it's a very good place to start.
Yes.
So, what about early childhood?
Okay, let's start there. So Mark has sent me a number of questions about this, actually.
Oh, okay.
So tell us about your family migrating to Australia from England, and what are your recollections?
Oh yes, well of course I got loads of my information from my grandmother, who always lived with us, and we shared a bedroom, and so that meant that many times, both at night before we got into bed and in the morning when she woke up, and I usually had to get out, she would be telling me all sorts of things about old England and what life was like. But Gran had a very hard life. She the man she married, of course, was a gambler, and he gambled all the money away. And so Granny, by this time, they'd had three daughters. The middle one was my mother, and her husband, whatever his name was, and I never found out what his name was, he was in so much debt that the bailiffs came in and sold the house over their heads. They put Granny and the three little girls out on the street, and they said to her, if you can prove that you have bought anything in this house, and by the way, she had bought most of the like the furniture and stuff in the house, if you can produce receipts for things you bought, we'll put those out with you. The only thing Granny had a receipt for was a sewing machine, and that was put out in the street, and they were left on the curb of the street with no roof over their heads, and the house was sold, and so Granny, from an early stage, always said to me, don't lose your receipts. And to this day, I cannot lose a receipt, which sounds ridiculous, but it was so, in her case, it was so vital. She could have claimed a lot of stuff, but she had to go back to her mother, who had 16 children. Granny had been the eldest daughter she had older brothers, but she was the oldest daughter. And so you can imagine a household with all these, and Gran had to go to work, of course, to put money into the house, and so it was just when another member of the family came to Australia and sent back glowing reports of this country, and Granny got the urge to come to a new country and start a new life out here, and of course that's what they did. They had to come in an old iron boat round the Cape of Good Hope. Terrible conditions, and they had to put up. The first time they touched Australia, at a port that they could get out and stretch their legs was Brisbane. And while they were in Brisbane, another member of the family who'd come out had a lovely little girl. I've got a photograph of her. Her name was Annie, and she was the darling of the boat, a very pretty little thing and evidently a lovely nature. And they went, while the boat was recharging, it had come into dock for whatever, I don't know what it needed to come into Brisbane for, but they went on a picnic into one of the parks in Brisbane and just have their lunch. And when it came time to pack up and get back on board, Annie was missing, and she was. They had to call the police. It was a real case, and the police came and dragged a lake, and they found her body. She had fallen in. She'd gone in to look at some flowers, probably water lilies or something that were growing, and she had plunged in. And so their first step in Australia was a tragedy. And then they came down to Sydney. They finally came down to Sydney, and they lived in Holt Street, Surrey Hills, and which was quite, it wasn't Surrey Hills. Surrey Hills went into great disrepute in later days, but it was quite good, and they stayed there. And so Mum, all the girls knew how to sew. Granny they had been tailoresses. They all could do wonderful work with sewing machines and sewing, very clever. And they all went to work, and Mum and a couple of them had nice voices. Mum had a very lovely voice, and so did my Auntie Flo. And they joined there was a big choir, the Burns choir, Bobby Burns, the great Scotsman or whoever he was, and it was there that she met Dad, and anyway, finally they became engaged and they were married, and Mum was, by that time Mum was 24, and Dad was 11 years older, so he'd have been 35. Now I've got to pause here because their first home was in Mossman. When Mum was, Gran had retired from being a tailoress in town, and they bought into a little shop next door to the picture show, and they served there'd be lollies at interval times, and they served like light morning teas and just light meals. Loads of people used to come in. It was a lovely little going concern, and of course one night, because they lived on the premises, or Mum and Dad lived on the premises, and I don't know where the others. I never found out where they all lived. They probably, goodness knows where they lived, but there was they lived somewhere in the Mossman area anyway. If they didn't, but they were living in this right next to the picture show when a fire broke in the early hours of the morning. A fire broke out. By this time, Mum was pregnant with my brother. That was her first child, and it was midwinter. It was July, I think Mum said it was. And the fireman knocked them up and said, "Look, the wall, the dividing wall between their shop and the picture show was going to collapse, and you better get out." So they all had to pile out into the street. And Mum grabbed her cash box and her Bible, and just raced out. And she said she stood there in the cold, and there was a wind blowing, and she just prayed, and she said, "Oh Lord, turn that wind around, just turn that wind around so that this wall won't fall." And it did. And so I was, from the very word go, I was brought up to know that I had a Heavenly Father who loved me. And so after that we the other girls were getting engaged and married, and that they sold the business, and Dad was looking for he had a bit of money. He was a self-made man, and he'd worked hard he was a sheet metal worker, and he was very clever at his trade. He brought out things that the Australians couldn't do. He could do work with metal that they couldn't do, and he was a great asset. And he rose to had a very good position in a business in town in Sussex Street.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was looking around for what he wanted was a pair of semi-detached cottages, so that he could get the rent from one, live in one, and get the rent from the other.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very interested in a cottage in Bronte and also the one in Bondi. And for some reason, Dad was pretty cluey when it came to money, and I think even at that stage of his life, he knew that eventually there would be a rail. He always spoke about this rail that would go out to Bondi. And for some reason he chose, when he had the choice of these two properties, he chose 30 and 32 Watson Street. And so that's where I was born there, of course. And that was the only home that I've ever known apart from this one. And so what else can I tell you about? Harry and I went to Bondi School, of course. In fact, the Bondi School people were writing up a book on. They were celebrating their 130th. What do you call it? Anniversary. And so they got in touch with somehow they got in touch with me. I don't know how. And they were asking if I could remember anything about Bondi School and the environs all around the school, even the businesses that were on Bondi Road. And Robert yesterday was looking up that book, and he's left it there with a marker in it, quoting some woman that was interviewing me, and it's mentioned that I had told them about this and this and this all around the school.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. I quite enjoyed school, although I wasn't a marvellous scholar, but I went to high school after that. Harry seemed to stay longer at Bondi School. I think they catered more for boys in those days, but we had the choice of just an intermediate high school, and so I went to Crown Street High, and from there, of course, by that time I was a teenager, a young teenager, and I went to business college and Stotton Underwood's Business College at Bondi Junction, did 12 months there, and so I was equipped to be an office worker, and eventually, of course, I was able to. The AMP were looking for staff, and I had to sit for exams with them. They required mathematics. You had to do a go into their building in town in Pitt Street, 87 and 89 Pitt Street, down near the quay, down that end of the city, and then you had to do an English. You had to write like they dictated, and you had to write down what they were saying, and then when you passed that one, you were interviewed before the board of directors. They had to see you. I'll never forget it. It was awesome. They were sitting like the judiciaries at one end of the room, the big room. It was quite opulent because it was a grand old building and everything was the highest quality. And the door was way over there, and you had to walk across. They watched you walk across the room, and there was a chair in front of them, and then they would talk to you about different things. And after you'd done all of these exams, you would be informed by post that they would like you to do the next one and then the next one, and so they were 200. I know there were 200 applicants. They only wanted 6, and so they asked you all sorts of questions. They wanted to hear how you spoke, if and so on and so forth. And then after all of that, you had to have a medical, because they had doctors downstairs. The big insurance companies always had, because it was a life insurance. As you know, it was life insurance. It wasn't just property. And then you had a medical. And then finally, after the weeks and weeks passed by, they said, "You're in."
Oh, wow.
Or words to that effect.
That's amazing.
And so I joined the AMP as a junior, of course, in May, and the following September the war was on.
Okay.
So all the time I was working for the AMP. It was war years, and gradually we saw all sorts of things happening then. We saw all the time at that stage, the agents. I was in the industrial department. There was the ordinary department and the industrial department, and the industrial department had agents that dealt with those small, a shilling a week policies. And they would go and they'd have a book. They'd do an area. They might do Narwee, part of Narwee, and they'd have people all over the Narwee, and they would knock on your door and to come for your, shilling a week, and to just to cover whoever's life it was, and because as the war went on, they were trying to decentralise Sydney, and the agents didn't. The agents used to come in one day a week, and sometimes you had to see them about something. I was in different departments, and sometimes you had to be in touch with there was some problem with some customer, and you had to see the agent, and we got used to sort of talking to the agents, and they had to. They didn't want so much travel coming into Sydney, and so if there was a superintendent had the eastern suburbs, they would meet somewhere in the eastern suburbs periodically. The agents were under a superintendent, and so on and so forth, and they had to. It was sort of decentralising everything, and I always remember. One of my bosses was a real character, and she used to say, "Well, if the Japs start bombing us," she said, we had to go through air raid drill and go down into the basement. That's all. If you were working in the city, that's all you could do. Get to the lowest point. And she said, and of course, if we're not killed from above, she said, we'll all drown in the tank stream. You know, the tank stream goes up Pitt Street, and it's right underneath the AMP. She said, and we'd all have a laugh about that, It was just, and periodically when they'd pop it on you, the sirens would go off. It was a mock thing, just to see how everybody would react. And so we'd all get into the lift, and the lift would... Because if the bombing started, the lifts would be probably the first things out. But anyway, we'd go through our stuff like that. And so all my later teen life was like... The sad part about it was that the men that I worked with, the agents, and even one of my bosses, I remember Stephen McCullough. He was head over our big department. The departments were huge. They really were huge. And they were all, one section was called schedules. You dealt with all the paperwork, and another was the typing pool and the accounts. And he was the head over that. He was quite a young man, and he joined up, and he became he joined the Air Force, and he was killed. He was shot down. He was what do you call him? Not a navigator. He wasn't a pilot, but he was the. Anyway,
Like
whatever he was, he had to be. He was skillfully trained, and he was a very brilliant. He was quite a brilliant man, and another John. I think I remember John Beaumont. He went into the Navy and he was killed, and so I saw. Even in those few years, I saw a lot of. We got used to. We didn't get used to it, but it was awful news. One of my finally, when after the Japs were. I'm just trying to think. We were married in 30. Oh golly, when were we married? Oh golly. Anyway.
I might just pause there for a moment, Grandma.
Absolutely.
Just want to make sure that everything's running smoothly here. So.
Sure, darling.
Yep, that's all good. So.
Yes, just a pause.
Yeah, just a short pause. Now you've just coming back to your early childhood.
Yep.
Now we're going to cover the war and things as well. There's lots of questions about that, but just on the early childhood. So, can you describe a typical day in your household as a child? So, morning routines and chores, and
yes.
Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Now let me just start. I'm just trying to think. We were always, as a family, we always got up early. I suppose I'd get up round about 7 o'clock when I was a little kid, and you'd have your brekkie, you'd brush your shoes, and you'd just get yourself ready for school.
Brushing your shoes, that's something that doesn't happen much these days. What's brushing your shoes mean?
Oh, that means you've got a tin of polish, and a little brush, and two brushes, one to put the polish on and one to take the polish off, and then there was usually like a pad that you shone them up so that your shoes shone, and you'd have to just look at you, because Mum would just make you a morning tea and a lunch, and to go into your school bag, and that's I'm talking about now, just even starting school, and off you'd go. Mum never had after the. When you're a tiny child, of course, your mother takes you the first day to school, and probably the first week. I can't remember the first week that Mum took me to school, but because Harry was there, he was like my older brother, as you know, and we'd go off together, and there was always someone to get us over Bondi Road to the school, because it was only Watson Street was very close to Bondi School, and so that wasn't any problem. And they always had somebody, either from an older person from the school or something, for the children to cross at the crossing. It was jaywalking wasn't in at this stage, of course, or anything like that. But so it was quite safe, and well, I got through. I had good teachers. My school, well, that was school. I'll deal with school. That was pretty uneventful. So I remember the teachers I did like. I liked Miss Burke, and I didn't like, and Miss Allen. I didn't like Miss Webb. She was a cranky, red-headed woman.
I had a Mrs. Webb when I was in high school, and she fits that description as well, actually. She wasn't well liked by a lot of the students. Yeah, she was quite cranky and a bit of a reputation for being a cranky teacher.
Cranky, isn't that funny? There must be something in the Webbs.
It must be, it must be. So with a typical school day, and I mean, just describe the classrooms. I mean, we don't have chalkboards in schools these days. It's all different technology. And just talk a little bit about just the mundane things of a classroom and what did it look like? What were the tables made of?
Oh, yes. The table, I can't remember what the tables looked like, particularly when you were in infants. Probably we sat around on mats or something. I can't even remember that. But when you get up into the a bit higher up, you had you didn't have inkwells came like, I can't remember the first. A third class was the first. After you've got through kindergarten and second class, third class was sort of the big. You felt you were in the big school. You're the youngest of the big school people, and Miss Boland was my third class teacher, and she was like a big hippopotamus, but you were in a, you could sit the desks were two, you sat beside somebody, and in there would be 4 rows of desks, and I used to like to get pretty close to the front because I had to wear glasses when I was 7. One of my eyes was not good. Mum was very conscious of that because she had an eye problem. And it might have been picked up at school. You know how the doctors would come around and test you, and so from the time I was in third class, I had to wear specs. But of course, there was the blackboard and the chalk, and you felt very honoured if you were allowed to clean the board.
Right.
That was quite a coveted activity. That was big time if you sweep with the teacher, and she'd get you to clean the board so that she could put more notations up on that, whatever we were doing. The sums would be pretty funny, but we had to buy our own exercise books as we got older for different subjects, and I remember buying. The teacher insisted that they were black covered. And I went down to the local paper shop and I bought, all that I needed when you started to write with pens, and you had an inkwell. An inkwell. That was in the desk. Between the two, there's the seated 2. In the top of the desk, there was a little part with a porcelain crockery container that had ink was in it, and the pen that you had, it was just an ordinary pen with like a nib on the end of it, a metal nib on the end that you had to dip into the inkwell and do your writing. Wow. That came later. I don't know whether from third class onwards the inkwell thing was there, but from then on we always seemed to have to cope. It was no longer just a pencil that you could write on. It was you had to write well on your lines and write printing first. Of course, you taught to print, and then later you taught to running writing, and that changed over the years.
What was the format of running writing? Was it modified cursive or?
Modified cursive came in later. It was stick and ball, I think. Stick and ball, the rounded ones. O's were very round. They weren't sort of oval.
Right.
You know how modified cursing was modified cursing is pretty right. Cursive writing was sort of it went through stages.
Yeah.
But and then of course when you got to high school, you could please yourself. You could write. They weren't so keen. They weren't cranky about how you wrote. And my French teacher used to have a beautiful hand. When she was writing something up on the board, it was beautiful, and I just loved. And so I got into the way of. Even now, I don't do my Fs. If I'm doing an F, the normal way, I don't do the F the normal way. It's a flowing one.
Yes.
So because the whole idea, and I don't know what it was like when you were at school, but you couldn't take your pen off the paper. That was the idea of finishing a word without lifting your pen. Everything had to be joined together. Good running writing. You know how there was there's printing.
Yep.
There was which each letter was separate,
Yep.
and then there was running writing where they all had to be linked up. Now, does that sound funny to you?
No, it's we modified cursive had already been sort of phased out by the time I was in primary school and learning how to do running writing. And I'm just trying to remember the name of. I think it's escaping me at the moment, but it wasn't modified cursive. It was the next one after that.
But at first you were told to make, like when it was stick and ball, it was, you know, everything had to be really rounded.
Right.
Like a D had to be nice and as rounded as you could, and then a very straight line, and everything was sort of, I think, straight. And then you got a lean on. You got that one that's sort of. So I don't remember a whole lot about that. That sort of evolved, and I wasn't really aware of it. But as I say, when you got to high school, it was a totally different thing.
Right.
I went to Bondi School to sixth class, and then we were all sorted out, and I went off to high school, and I took the course there. You could take Latin. You had there were 9, I did 9 subjects for the intermediate. There were 9, and there was like, oh golly, I haven't counted them up. There was history and geography and botany, history, geography, botany, grammar, English, French, Maths 1, Maths 2, and there was a subject called Merceration, and and then I didn't take the Latin course. That was obligatory. Everybody had to do that, but you divided off whether you went into a Latin class or an art and needlework class. And at that age, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I wasn't given the choice. Mum had to choose for me, and so being a sewer herself, she said, "Oh, art and needlework."
Right.
And so then the classes were, the Latin class was different now. It was split down. The Latin kids, like 3A would be the Latin class, and 3B would be the art and needlework lot. And so I only went as far as the intermediate.
And tell us about, sorry, I just was wondering, in modern schools and in the modern era, discipline is very different to how it would have been when you were in high school. So I think things like a paddle were used for naughty kids, and
yes,
and you know, when I was in high school that didn't exist, but they still had the cane, and I think even now that's been outlawed. So
yes, so I believe. Well, we did have, because I was in a girls' high school. It wasn't co-ed.
Right.
You were divided off. Then there was the boys. The boys' high school was next to us, but we were definitely, it was segregation. But our headmistress, Miss Houston, did have a cane, and one time I was I was just joking with a friend of mine. I was whacking her over the head with a tennis racket. It was sports day or something, and she copped me, and she said, "Get down to my office." And so I think she gave me a tap on it didn't hurt, but she sort of wanted to bring me in line. That wasn't very ladylike, you know. We're only having a bit of fun, you know. Right. She was a strict, one of those very strict disciplinarians. Yeah. But anyway, so that was it. So that was the end of my school days. A girl I was very fond of at high school was going to university. She was hoping to do higher education, and I always remember there was an open day at Sydney Uni, and she always aspired to be a reporter. And so on that orientation, that day that they open up and anybody can go in and sort of sit in on the lectures. And so we went into a English lecturer, into whatever, this is Sydney Uni, and this girl's name was Betty. And Betty had a writing pad there. She was eager beaver. She knew exactly at that stage she knew exactly what she wanted to be doing to go to work. And she had chosen reporting. She just wanted, and she was very good with words. And anyway, she dragged me, I was allowed to go too. And we sat in on this lecture, and he was on Chaucer, and I was aghast when I couldn't understand. It was like another language, when whatever he was on about. I thought, this is unintelligible to me. This is like trying to learn another language. I was bad enough with French. I'm not real good at languages, and I thought, this old English, and so. I had no desire, absolutely no desire to be a university person. Anyway, I doubt if I could have afforded, if Mum and Dad could have afforded it, because remember all of my early childhood, the depression. We were still getting over the depression, and that's why, although Dad was able to buy these houses, that left him high and dry too, and there was nothing coming in. As the depression went on, sometimes he got 1 day's work a week to keep us going, and so for that reason, Mum was a marvellous housekeeper. How she kept Harry and I healthy. She'd buy us fruit that she wouldn't eat it. She'd just buy for us, and so anyway, that's I'm sort of backtracking again, but that was all in my school days and early childhood. I do remember you couldn't waste a thing. It was a case of waste not, want not. That was Granny used to drill that into me. Waste not, you don't waste a thing. And so to that day, I've inherited that, and Unfortunately, I've passed it on to Richard, which of course he's become such an avid bargain hunter.
Yes.
It's comical to go shopping with him.
Well, it's not a bad thing, is it?
You make your money go a long way, longer than if you didn't.
Yes.
Let's put it that way. So that's about all I can tell you, Ben, about school days.
Okay. Well, Mark also is interested in any mishaps or accidents. And he's quoted here the slippery dip injury at Bankstown.
Oh yes, where Bankstown Babs is. That's right. My aunt lived opposite she lived in number 45 Stanley Street was my auntie Bella's house, and she had three boys. So they were my cousins. And because I was when Mum and Dad went visiting Auntie Bella, and by the way, it took a tram from Bondi to Central and a train to Bankstown. It was quite an adventure just to travel to my aunt's place. Yeah. But when I got there, I had these three younger boys, and they were no fun. And so I went across. I was allowed to go across to the slippery dip on this piece of land that had just a little tiny. Well, I suppose it was a church. I didn't know what it was. There was like a little cottagey thing on there, but there was this lovely slippery dip in and it was all open. There was no gates because it was just a block of land, and didn't have any boundaries. But it was safe to go across there. When I go up to Stanley Street these days, oh boy, what a difference! And yes, and so I'd never been on a slippery dip. It looked like a lot of fun. I'd never been on a slippery dip before. Never. And
How old were you at this time?
I was probably about 10, something like that. And so as I went sliding down, I must have put instead of curving my feet over to at the bottom, I put them, I slid down with my legs still like that, and of course I landed on my bottom, and I remember the agony. I just crawled away, and I was in such pain. I'm rather wondering if that's why I've got a bad back now. But it was just awful, and I had to sort of sit quiet. I was on my own. My cousins weren't with me, and I didn't ever tell anybody, but I always remember that. And when I look at Banky Baps now, and we've all been to Banky Baps for weddings and christenings and goodness knows what, and I just think this is the spot that I received that. Just a nasty little incident, that was painful. It wasn't nasty, but it was just painful. Anyway, I can't tell you any more about that. But that was brought up something else too, darling, and I can't think what I wanted to tell you. Anyway, yeah.
Well, Marcus has also quoted here that an incident, an electric shock while you were snailing.
Oh, yes.
First of all, what's snailing? Describe that to us.
My parents were great gardeners. Well, my mother was a great gardener, and she used to grow beautiful dahlias at Bondi. And there was a lot of snails. And snails don't come... if you want to catch snails, you have to go out at night. So Dad, who wasn't an electrician, rigged up like a light. There's old-fashioned lights that are just a cover over a bulb.
Yep.
on a flex.
Mm-hmm.
And so he... So I was to hold the light while he searched under the bushes, and we used to have a bucket. It sounds terribly cruel, with salt in it, and you'd throw all these snails into the salt. And snailing was, we do it in the summer, because the dahlias come out through in the warmer weather, and and they only come out, you don't see them in the day, but at night they emerge. Where they hide through the day, I don't know, but you can often see them crawling along the ground, and it was great fun. I used to enjoy going snailing, and on this particular night, I was holding the lamp, and all of a sudden it became alive, and I can always remember Dad trying to pull it off me, and it wouldn't go off. I was trying to shake it off, and it was stuck. It was stuck to my hand. It was burning into my palm, and Dad must have screamed out to Mum, who was inside the house, and Mum didn't know what the matter was, but an instinct, he went straight to the power point and turned it off. Mm-hmm. And I remember the thing dropping to the ground, and I was shaking. I was shaking like this, as if I was still in the midst of being the electricity going through my body. Mm. I had sand shoes on, which was good. That would probably be as good as anything. Yep. Because of the rubber and some insulation. Mm. But that was a pretty close call when you think about it.
Absolutely.
And I remember that, because Mum and Dad really fussed over me. When I remember sitting on the chair and just shaking, and they did all they could to... I wasn't crying, but I was just... I was...
Dare I say it? Were you in shock?
It was literally shock. An electric shock. It was a shock, and I'll never forget it. I often think about the electric chair. That must be awful. Anyway, so I can't tell you any more than that. I don't know if Marcus. I don't know what I've told him, but I can't add anything, and I can't take anything subtract anything, so he'll have to put up with that one. Sorry.
Grandma, I'm sure that's exactly what he wanted to know about. I'm sure he's got a clear picture in his mind now of what happened. So, but yes.
Oh well, there you go.
Now, Uncle Rob mentioned that recently a primary school friend of yours contacted you.
Oh, that was about that book. Yes,
right.
this person did contact me,
Right.
and she came out of the blue, and she just wanted to know all about, because she was in charge of gathering all the material for that book, that particular book there.
Okay.
And you might like to see it anyway, darling. I don't know if that's got any. Is it the one on top? What's the?
Is it over here or?
No, it was on the table, darling. Is it? Did you move those books on? There was a couple of books.
Some magazines here.
Yeah, it's got a tag on the front of it, like a. What's that one? That's it. And Rob put this in. He was looking at. See that mark? He said that's something about. That's quoting me, but that's all about the school, darling. I don't know that that's.
Wow. The Depression at Bondi Primary School, remembered by Hazel Glover.
Yeah.
Glover is your maiden name, I assume?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm going to take a photograph of this, Grandma.
Oh, sure.
And that can be a nice little picture that I can have as part of this little project. So that's, wow. There you go.
Would you like the light on, darling?
Oh no, that's all right. They're quite good, these phones these days. So I might have a read of that later.
Yes, by all means.
Okay, so now this is fascinating, Grandma. I'm enjoying these tales, and
must be boring.
No. It's really
boring.
really fascinating. Now. Luke and Mark and myself are all interested in learning a little bit more about your parents.
Yes.
So, what were their names, and where and when were they born, and what were they like as parents, and what was their cause of death and the year of death. So there's a lot there. So why don't we start with, just tell us their names and describe them.
Okay. Well, I'll start with Mum. Mum's full name was Elizabeth Ida Hakely, and she was the most beautiful, loving, gentle, understanding person I've ever known. I loved my mother so much, and I remember when she tucked me in at night and I'd say, "Mummy, I love you," she'd say, "Yes, I love you too." That was something that was, after we'd said our prayers, we'd always say our prayers. She taught me my first little prayer, and she was obviously, my mother, with the nature that she had, being brought up by her grandmother. Now remember, her grandmother had 16 children and she had no patience. She was fed up with children, and so the three girls, her three little grandchildren, suddenly foisted on her. It went like this. Mum was the middle one. The youngest one, being the baby, was a pet of her grandmother. Always a baby on the whole gets the lion's share. The adoration goes on the baby because they're helpless little things. Mum was the one in the middle, and her Auntie Bella, the eldest, her eldest sister, was very delicate and had to have special food. Mum was the one in the middle who was strong, wasn't the baby, and so she got the least attention. And so it must have been rather, kids are very sensitive, they sort of know. I know Auntie Bella was always delicate. She was delicately. She was sort of her shape wasn't robust, and she would have to have an egg a week, and Mum had never tasted an egg,
Right.
because they couldn't afford it. But Auntie Bella got the good the food that would build her up. They wanted her to be built up. So you can see Mum was the one in the middle that missed out on any extras. She didn't, but it was a character builder. Well, it didn't rankle with her, and she didn't let it rankle with her. She's a person with a very simple faith, and she taught. And of course, Granny was a very strong Christian. My grandmother had a very, she'd had as I say, a hard life, and she'd been a very faithful wife and a very diligent wife, and copped it. And so she'd been hurt, but it made her strong. And so when it came to who would Granny live with after they sold the business over there at Mossman, she elected to. She really wanted to be with my mother. Now, Mum was always, although she was baptised Elizabeth Ida, she always got Ida. So and funnily enough, every now and to give Mum a bit of a break, the other two girls must have felt when they were married and they'd got their own homes. Every now and again, they would, particularly Bella would ask Grandma to stay with them for a couple of weeks, and Granny would go, but in no time at all she was back again, because Bella had absolutely no patience, and living with Bella wasn't the happiest thing in the world, and Granny was glad to be back home with us. And she obviously, it was my mother's soft nature that was so lovely, and Mum was such a lovely daughter. She's a lovely mother and she's a lovely daughter, and so I got the very best, Ben. God gave me the very, very best in my mother. Dad had had a hard life, because he was Harry Glover. His two brothers were Tom and Dick. It was always Tom and Dick and Harry.
Right.
And he was the Harry out of that lot. And I don't know I think he was the middle one. But his mother died. I don't know if my brother ever knew much about his mother, because she must have died while the children were quite young. And of course, Dad's father married again.
Right.
And it was a case of the wicked stepmother. She had children, and of course the children of the first marriage were neglected, and so one of Dad's brothers migrated out here, and as soon as Dad had learned his trade, he migrated out here too, and so he had a miserable childhood, a very miserable childhood, and he was quite a stern father. What Dad said, you never questioned, and the rules of the household had to be kept. I remember him being quite violent with Harry. Harry overstepped the mark. I don't know what he'd done, but I remember him just getting a belt over the bottom, and but Dad never belted me, and but he did. He because he had been a hard worker and he'd got his money the hard way. There were rules in the household. Because we had lovely furniture, he liked nice furniture, and our dining room table was beautiful. It was, I forget what the wood was. I knew it at one stage. Very lovely Australian wood, but beautifully turned out and lovely. The turning on it was lovely. You know, the legs and things like that. And if you dared put when you came home from school, I'm talking about high school days, when you've got homework, because you come home with loads of homework, every single teacher that you had, and remember I had 8 or 9, and so, of course some of them you wouldn't have any homework, but you'd have to sit. When I came in from school, from high school, you would sit down at the dining room table and do your homework, but don't dare scrape your bag. The bag would never go on the table, because it would score the wood. And so he was quite paranoid about that. You had to look after what you got, and he taught me that too. And to this day I love good wood, and I you know, if anything's, I love watching bargain hunt for some of those wonderful old wooden things that have been made, and the way they've been, the beautiful way they've been put together and turned and inscribed, you know, sort of. Oh, it's just lovely. And so, yeah, Dad loved wood, and he was a good dad. He at one stage he got, since we've been up here, of course, he got sick, and he was, now this was when Marcus was only quite a baby, and Dad had gone into what's the lovely hospital at Darlinghurst?
Oh.
Oh.
I should know, because that's where I was born. I believe.
That's where all the big heart, where the heart specialist that did that wonderful heart transplant. You know, that Dr. Chang or St. Vincent's. St. Vincent's Hospital at Darlinghurst. He was in St. Vincent's, and he had an operation, and then he was sent to where used we have to go? He was sent off to out at Point Piper. I think, was it out? They had like a what do you call it? Like a, where you recover, like a, there's a name for it. Anyway, Dad, when Marcus was born, Dad, Dick, my husband, would he'd come home from work, and Marcus, me and Marcus and him would take off and visit Dad, and he died out there. I think it's Darling Point or Point Piper. It was it was connected with St. Vincent's anyway. It was like one of their special places that they had, and so I remember seeing him after he died. We didn't see him. We weren't sitting with him when he did die, but we went out there. We had to go out there, so Dad was the first to go, and then Mum insisted on living on her own, and at Bondi, and so I used to say to her, just come and stay once a month. I'd say, look, come. Dick was really, he loved my mum, and he would have said, come and live with us, but she wouldn't. And we constantly said, come and live with us, and she said no. She said, because one of her friends was widowed and she was living on her own. She said, if Renee can live on her own, I can live on my own. And so we, I said, well, look, come and stay with us for a week, once a month. And so I wanted to soften her down to get used to being here, being used to her having the room,
Yeah.
and so she did that, and but she'd always want to go back. She still always wanted to go back. She never wanted to come and stay permanently. So we went with it, and so anyway, then the day came when I got and I besought her so many times. I said, "Mum, you've got to come and stay with us." No, she said, "No, I'm fine." And then I got the phone call from and because me and the kids used to go out every Saturday. We'd always have Saturday out there with Mum. We'd leave here and go out through Kingsford. We'd go out that way, and get to Bondi. And Richard at that stage was having special swimming lessons in Bondi Baths, and so he'd go off to have his swim, and we'd just spend the day with Mum, and that was lovely. And she loved the kids. She just loved the kids, as you can imagine. And then we would have tea at night. We'd wash up. The last thing we'd do was wash up, and then we'd leave. And she used to always stand out the front and wave us off. And so then a couple of that, I suppose we did that for perhaps 2 years. I don't know. I can't remember how the time slot went, but one day I got this phone call from a doctor from an Eastern Suburbs hospital, and he said, "Your mother was found." He explained that they had. She always got her milk every morning. The milkman used to leave a bottle of milk on her front doorstep, and that was a daily thing. And one morning, the milk was still there at about midday, and so they got alarmed. The neighbours, who used to sort of more or less keep an eye on her, and so the neighbours got in touch with, reported this, and the police came round. They had to force their way into the house. Mum was in the bath. She'd been in the bath all night, and she was still alive. And this was May. It was the month of May, and the water's pretty chilly. Anyway, even in the summertime, to sit in a car, she loved a really hot bath. She always had a nice hot bath, but she could not get out of that bath. She was in that bath and she couldn't get out of it, and so so she finished up in Eastern Suburbs Hospital, and I drove straight out there to see. I was appalled. And the doctor said to me, "She shouldn't be living on her own." And I said, "If you knew the number of times I've asked my mother to come and live with us, you'd be amazed." I wasn't going to take that from him. I thought, "You don't know, you're ignorant of the real facts." And but for once I was really furious. And so anyway, I came home. They said, "Well, they were going to bring her home in an ambulance home here." And so, of course, we built this room on then, and that was the boys' room. That was Richard and Robert's room originally, and then, of course, as they both went off, it became Christine's room. And Richard got married, and Robert went into the ministry. And he didn't need it, so it was Christine's room, and so the two beds, one on each side of the room, and so I'd warmed up the bed. There was an electric blanket on the bed. I'd got it nice and warm by the time she came home. But they popped her into bed, and And Chris was going to go into this room now that was empty, and that bedroom in there, and so I was going to sleep in the other room opposite Mum, so that I could keep an eye on her. I called in Dr. Munro as soon as she came home. I said, I'd like you to sound my mother out, which he did. It was a Friday night, and and he said, look, he gave me some, I don't know what, some pills or something. He said, look, give her one of these before she goes to bed or something. There was some medication, it was in pill form, that was there. And so we went to bed that, and so Mum, before we went to bed, Mum said, I was just, pottering around. She was in bed and I was pottering around in the room, and she said, I'll go to the toilet. And so she got out of bed, and I stood behind her and I walked her into the toilet. And then she came back to bed and got in bed, and that was it. So we put the lights out and so on and so forth. And then through the night, I could hear a strange noise. Never heard a noise quite like it. And I jumped out of bed straight away and put my little bed light on, and I went over to Mum, and she looked very, I can't quite remember. She looked strange, but it was this funny gurgling noise, and so I propped her up, and I had some water there or something, and these tablets, and I thought, I wonder if she needs one of these, and I don't know whether she, she had a sort of a, I don't really know whether, with hindsight I can't remember whether she gulped the water or whatever, and I just laid her gently down again, and put out the light, and went back to bed, and I woke at 6 o'clock the next morning, and everything was very quiet. I jumped out of bed, I raced over, and she'd gone. And I can only think that was the death rattles. They talk about the death rattles. I've never heard anyone at that stage of passing on into the next life. I've never seen it before. I've never heard it before, but evidently that was what I had been listening to, and I felt so sorry that I wasn't sitting there just holding her hand. That's really haunted me for a long, long time. The Lord's healed me of that, because it was something that in my ignorance I didn't know, but there's still a sorrow in me that I wasn't there just to be with her. And so that was, I got in touch with my doctor straight away, and I spoke to his wife. He only lives round the corner, Dr. Munro, and he's a Seventh-day Addy, and of course Saturday is their holy day. That's their Sabbath. That's the seventh day, and he didn't come, and in the end, and I got Chris. Of course, Chris had been doing nursing, and she came out and she did all sorts of things. She knew what to do, because in her nursing, your mum, she knew exactly what to do, and until the doctor came. But we were. It's a terrible thing when someone you love is lying dead and you're waiting. You sort of tiptoe. You whisper. that was my reaction.
Mm.
That we were sort of, Chris and I were sort of whispering and just creeping around, and finally he came. He had to, because he'd seen her in the last 24 hours, you know, so that meant she didn't have to have an autopsy, you know, if it's, as you know, that's the law. And so, and he said to me, she must have had a stroke. And I said, no, I don't think so. I said, I took her to the toilet, just, you know, at 9 o'clock, whatever the time was, after he'd gone. I said, and he said, she actually walked? And I said, yes, she did. So he couldn't write down what he really felt she had died from.
Right.
He couldn't believe that anyone that close to death would be walking.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what that report looked like, and I'll never know, and I never really want to know, because it wasn't foul play. It just wasn't foul play. He had seen her, and he had diagnosed her as being someone had been exposed to chills, and which wasn't good at her age, but he'd given a little bit of medication to help with whatever. And so that was that, and so we were back out at Eastern Suburbs crematorium, and she and Dad are in the rose garden just inside the front gate of Eastern Suburbs out there.
So how old was she when she passed away?
She'd have been 70. Oh, about 76, I think, darling. I don't really know. I haven't never sort of sat down and thought about it. But that was just so sad. But she did have Parkinson's.
Right.
And so that, which wasn't good. Anyway, yeah.
Thank you, Grandma. It's a amazing story.
Yes,
and obviously one that's very close to your heart.
Absolutely. You'd have loved her, and she'd have loved you, Ben. She was such a lovely, lovely person. I've got that precious photo that I think some of you, I think your mother's taken in one of the, I should have tried to dig it out, I will sometime, she was a real beauty. She had the most beautiful blue eyes. She was a blue-eyed blonde, Mum, and not real blondie, but like a pretty, just like an English beauty, and but she had a beautiful spirit. You know, I think when I look at her two sisters, they weren't in the same league. They just weren't in nature. And God gave me the very best. And I always was glad that Dad was a disciplinarian, and I was always glad that Dick was a disciplinarian. And he used to, in his own way, his word was law, and the kids have turned out good. They really and truly have. And so I've got so much to thank God for. Look, I go around the family in prayer, and I like to name you all, get a picture of you in my mind when I'm just talking to the Lord. I think, Lord, I am so rich. I'm rich in the right things, in beautiful human beings around me. That's the most precious thing you can have, honestly. It's such a joy, you know. And, oh, Ben, that's about it.
Well, Grandma, I can certainly see that the way you're describing your mother is
loved her.
Is
loved him.
I can see that in you. She's past. She's past those
I
traits.
wish. Oh, I wish. No, Ben. No.
Grandma, I'm sure every single family member would agree with me when I say that the way you describe her is exactly how we feel about you, and those traits that you're talking about has been instilled in you, and it makes total sense to me when you describe your mother. It makes sense to me because of the way you are. I can. It sounds like you're describing yourself to me as your grandson.
Thank you, Ben. That's very magnanimous of you. That's very loving of you. But I know what I know. Oh, Ben.
Well, let's have a little break, Grandma. I think.
Yes.
I'll just press.
Now listen, Ben. What can I make you? What can I make you?